I guess I just wanted to talk a little bit about philosophy. I do science communication and I want to do a little philosophy communication as well. So I want to emphasize the importance of philosophy. And so I guess my first question to you is a little background on what first drew you to philosophy?
Yeah, so I mean, I grew up in a very deeply, devoutly religious household,
Mhm.
and so religion at least was in the air. And I also went to religious private education, K through 12, and with that was various theology classes, um, almost every day of my education. So, and theology, it's not philosophy, but it's quite similar. And there were certain like units or modules within those classes where we would cover philosophical topics. And that was always super fascinating to me. I was also interested in science, and it was eventually reflecting on the evolutionary process and all the suffering that's built into the evolutionary process that in around eighth, ninth-ish grade led me to start questioning my religious views. That kind of also led me into philosophy. So it was from science to reflecting on my religious beliefs and then finding philosophy and all these philosophical arguments for and against God's existence. So it's partly my upbringing, just being interested in religious topics, but also partly springing out of science.
So you were really young, eighth to ninth grade, getting into these kind of dense philosophical topics. Early on, was there any kind of specific thinker or book that really had an effect on you?
Yeah, so I'm not sure if there was any single book or single thinker which had a massive influence. It was just a confluence of various different people, various different arguments, various different books and papers and YouTube videos and everything. I mean, there were some salient names who definitely influenced my journey into philosophy and kind of got me hooked. So one of them was actually no, sorry, Jeff Lauder, who is a kind of popularizer of the work of Paul Draper. And Paul Draper, he's this non-theist philosopher at Purdue University. He's one of the best non-theist philosophers in the world. He's one of the most formidable proponents of the argument from evil. Um, and so, through the popularization of Draper's work by Jeff Lauder, I learned so much about the problem of evil. And I remember watching this debate between Jeff Lauder and Frank Turek actually in high school, and I was like, "Oh, this is the coolest thing!" He sort of introduced me to Bayes' theorem, um, introduced me to arguing and thinking quite rigorously about these topics. So I would say those two names come to mind first, Jeff Lauder and Paul Draper. I mean, there are some others as well. I mean, I listened a lot to the Relay Theology podcast in high school by Justin Schieber. Um, and I wasn't, of course, only listening on the skeptical side. I was also listening to various voices on the theist side, like William Lane Craig. Um, but uh, but yeah, at least in the early stages, those are the biggest names that come to mind. As for books, I mean, I was uh, I was sort of devouring internet articles. I read articles more than I read books. So like papers published by philosophers, but also like blog posts and internet forums and various other things. So yeah, I wasn't a big book reader, but I was a huge article reader. So I can't really name any books off the top of my head. I mean, of course, I read some, but none that come immediately to mind.
Do you think that philosophy is better in like a book style or in like a blog writing an article kind of style?
Yeah, I mean, I would say there are pros and cons to each, right? So, like a book length project allows you to really get into the nitty-gritty details, cover most of the terrain on a given topic, to go in depth into most, if not all, of the extant objections, to survey most, if not all, of the extant literature. And that's certainly a pro with books. Just the extent of coverage and the depth. Um, The con is that sometimes you just lose the forest for the tree. Or wait, no, you get lost in the details, and yeah, you get lost in the details, and you sort of lose the big picture. And that's something that's nice about like short, quippy blog posts, which just develop like one single argument and then address the most forceful objection very briefly and cogently. Um, there's something to that kind of mode of presentation which uh, I am quite attracted to. I mean, this is partly why I make YouTube videos. I mean, granted, some of my YouTube videos are like grotesquely long, but uh, they're typically not like book length, and usually they're on just like one topic. It's quite pointed, it's quite focused, and I try to focus on like the central objections and whatnot. And I find that if you do that sort of thing with a sufficiently broad range of topics, you can get a pretty broad knowledge of philosophy, as opposed to, the time investment that it takes to read an entire book. And then even there, you typically, unless it's like a survey book, you typically won't get a kind of broad knowledge of philosophy or a whole subfield of philosophy. You'll typically only be a kind of detailed expert on one particular argument or like one small topic. Um, so I just think there are pros and cons to each. I could go on and on, but that's, I think, sufficient.
And how did you just reading about philosophy and being interested in it turn into you making content and making a blog? How did that happen?
Yeah. So my channel was a COVID baby, as it were. Like COVID hit. I was at Purdue at the time. I was an undergrad. And it hit like midway through the spring semester. And yeah, there's this global pandemic. No one knows what's going on. Almost all colleges just like sent the students home. So a lot of our professors were like, we don't really know what's going on. This is completely disrupting the lesson plans. Just like finish this one paper for your final project, and then we'll call it a semester. That's like what a lot of professors were doing. And what that meant is that I had a lot of time on my hands at that point, and I foreseeably had a lot of time on my hands because it was like lockdown season. So what was I to do? Well, at that point, I had already been taking like extensive notes on some of the things that I was reading, just because I that's one of the ways that I synthesize information. Um, I already was interested in putting my ideas out there, getting feedback, helping others discover important truths, but also helping myself process um, my own kind of inquiry and my own research into these matters. Uh, and so I was like, why not make a YouTube channel? It'll be fun, and I could invite philosophers on, and all these philosophers that I've been reading, I could like get them on and have them debate or talk with each other, and that would be really cool. So I decided to start the channel, and then the rest is history. So partly it was just a matter of external circumstances providing me with more time and not really knowing what to do with that time. So I was like, oh, let's just make a YouTube channel. But also partly because I already had an interest in um, just helping other people think critically and rigorously about these topics that matter, and also just getting the help of other people to help me think about these things more rigorously. Um, yeah, but as for why did I start the blog, I don't know why. Again, I've always just sort of been interested in presenting my ideas and working through them publicly, just because it's like the marketplace of ideas, right? You're putting your ideas out there for criticism, and if they can stand up to scrutiny, then oh, that's great for you. But also, if they can't stand up to scrutiny, that's also great for you because you get to learn more and you get to discard your false and unjustified beliefs. So it's ultimately a process of me just trying to discover important truths, and this is the way that I go about doing it.
You're currently getting your doctorate in philosophy at Princeton. So I'm gonna make the assumption that you think philosophy is something important. Why do you think philosophy still has importance in our modern world?
Yeah, why is philosophy important? Well, there are lots of reasons. I mean, one is like, listen, we all have philosophical beliefs, right? Like, we all have beliefs about whether or not God exists, or maybe we have beliefs about whether or not it's possible to know whether God exists. We all have beliefs about morality, like whether abortion is permissible or impermissible, or whether the state should be able to dictate those sorts of matters. We have beliefs about whether political authority is even justified to begin with, whether or not it's legitimate for a state to have a kind of monopoly on the legitimate use of violence. Um, we all have views about whether other people are morally responsible. We have views about whether or not our current criminal justice system is um, a good thing or a bad thing. These are all philosophical views that philosophers debate. quite significantly. Your views on these questions will depend on your views about free will and moral responsibility. It'll depend on various other your views about like the structure, the general structure of reality, right? Like whether or not there's a God, or whether or not it's just the material world around us that's all that there is. Um, we have views about whether or not we're going to survive death, right? Is there an afterlife in store for us or not? We typically have views about that, or we have views about whether or not that's knowable. All of these are philosophical views. All of these are philosophical claims about which there is significant philosophical disagreement, and concerning which we can mount philosophical arguments for and against. And so, basically, we have a forced choice here. We could either just take these views from, I mean, who knows where, like our upbringing, our indoctrination, our, TikTok, or, just like what your confused third grade teacher taught you. That's one thing you could do. You could do philosophy very shittily, and you could not pay very careful attention to your beliefs and evaluate them and consider arguments for and against them. Um, that's one option. But another option is to actually do philosophy and do it well, to actually study these matters, to actually learn how arguments work, to learn how to evaluate and analyze arguments, to learn how to make distinctions, to learn how to justify your beliefs or update your beliefs in light of evidence. Um, and I think, given that we're all presented with that forced choice, we all basically have to have philosophical views. Why not then do this project well? Why not do this enterprise well? And what is the project of maintaining your philosophical beliefs well? Well, it's just philosophy, right? So I think the value of philosophy is in um, helping us with that kind of doxastic upkeep, helping us maintain justified beliefs, try to get as many true beliefs about these really important matters as we can, to discard as many false beliefs as we can, and just to have well-grounded, reasoned um, views about these really important topics that we're all basically forced to have views about. I mean, again, like, why would you do, why would you what's the right way to put it? Why would you do philosophy shittily when you could do it well? And the value in philosophy is helping you do it well, because again, it's like a forced choice. So that's one reason I think we all have to have essentially philosophical views, and the value in philosophy is helping us um, have the most justified, reasonable views on offer. But there are other reasons why philosophy is valuable. So one of them is that um, philosophy is a very good tool to make you an excellent bullshit detector. You can essentially, philosophy equips you with the tools and the skills needed to evaluate essentially any claim that comes your way. It equips you with the skills and tools necessary to um, evaluate what politicians say, what advertisers say, what various people in our culture are saying. And you could just evaluate those arguments, see whether or not they're good or bad, see whether their conclusions follow from their premises, see pinpoint hidden underlying assumptions in those premises, pinpoint distinctions that the proponents of those arguments are eliding. Um, these are all immensely valuable tools, and philosophy is essentially the study of these tools and the practice of using these tools particularly well. So I think philosophy gives you lots of these transferable skills of just being able to analyze and evaluate arguments, teasing out underlying assumptions of claims, um, making careful distinctions, and it just clarifies your thinking in that sort of way, and thereby allows you not to be duped and allows you to detect bullshit much better than you otherwise would have been able to. So that's a second reason why philosophy is valuable. And there are lots of other reasons as well, but for me, those are perhaps the two biggest.
I think the public kind of has their own idea of what philosophy is. What do you think the biggest misconception about philosophy is from people who don't really care for it?
The biggest misconception. Yeah.
Doesn't have to be the
I,
biggest, maybe just the most annoying to you personally.
Oh, well, one is like when people conflate philosophy with other sorts of disciplines like psychology or something, like, oh, that's like psychology. And it's like, no, it's not psychology. No, we're not kind of performing experiments on human subjects or anything like that. Um, Instead, we're marshaling arguments and trying to give reasons on behalf of their premises concerning very important conclusions, like whether God exists or whether we have free will or whether um, political authority is legitimate or whether, morality is uh, real and an objective thing that's kind of binding on us, as opposed to just a mere expression of our preferences. These very important things. That's what philosophy is about, studying those sorts of questions. So one thing is like the subject matter of philosophy. There's lots of confusion and ignorance about the subject matter of philosophy that I wish could be corrected. Another thing is that one common misconception about philosophy is that people think that like it doesn't have any answers, or it's all just like pointless intellectual masturbation or something like that. And I just think it couldn't be further from the truth. Like, how is it pointless whether or not God exists? Like, what? Like, I mean, that could make a difference to your eternal destiny, perhaps. I mean, like, that seems pretty significant. And like, even if you don't think the question is in and of itself significant, God's existence and like religion and religious topics are like immensely politically important, especially in the United States. Um, Various people, I mean, it has to do with the separation of church and state. Various religious groups are pushing for those no longer to be separate. It has to do with various social policies. So various religious groups are pushing for banning same-sex marriage and various other sorts of things, and they're drawing explicitly on like religious theological justifications for that. Um, it's certainly true that like whether God exists is relevant to whether those justifications hold any water. Religious epistemology is likewise extremely significant here, because like religious epistemology is essentially the study of how we come to know things about religious claims or irreligious claims. And if, for instance, massive disagreement among religions should make us skeptical whether or not we can know things in the religious domain, that's a philosophical question, and it's deeply relevant to whether or not it's legitimate to appeal to these sorts of religious justifications in a political context. So, like, I think these questions are just intrinsically incredibly important. They're not just like trivial questions that don't matter. Um, but also they have a significant bearing on public life and our public life in relation to one another. So, combating that misconception that philosophy is kind of like pointless speculation, I think is important. And also, like, there's this misconception that, like, oh yeah, there are no objective answers here, or like we can't figure it out, or anything like that. Like, listen, like, it's either God exists or he doesn't, right? Like, either we're gonna survive our deaths or we're not. Like, there's an objective fact about this. It's not like, oh yeah, God exists for you, but not for me, as if like there's some sort of like perspective dependent existence or something. Um, there are indeed objective questions here. There are answers to these questions. And the task of philosophy is to help us at least either try to find out the answers to those, or at least give us better understanding about those questions and their potential answers. Um, Now, as for whether or not we can actually discover truths about these domains by using the philosophical tools, um, I would just say, how do you know you can't unless you actually use those tools and try to reason through these issues? After all, lots of philosophers think they have found the right answers about these questions. Um, Lots of ordinary non-philosophers think they've found the right answers. Uh, we have these various tools, which are just the general tools that we use to reason about things. We marshal arguments, we marshal reasons on behalf of their premises. The premises imply their conclusions. So if their premises are all true, it just follows that their conclusion is true. Why couldn't we gain knowledge uh, about these matters by appealing to premises which are true and known to be true, and which are known to lead to their conclusions? Um, I mean, people here might appeal to like, oh, there's so much disagreement in philosophy and whatnot. So I guess does that mean we can't have any answers, or does that mean we can't have any knowledge about our answers to those questions? Um, I mean, one thing to say here is that that is itself a philosophical argument. So, like, if disagreement about a domain kind of vitiates your claims to knowledge about that domain, then the proponent of this argument has a self-defeating argument, right? Because there's significant disagreement about whether or not this argument itself works, and so the argument is basically saying, "Hey, don't believe me because there's significant disagreement about me." So the argument kind of shoots itself in the foot. But even ignoring that problem, well. I'll just leave it at that. There are various other things that could be said here, but I think I'll leave it there.
Um, I think the next question I have for you is you started studying philosophy at a really young age, like you said before, much younger than most people would start asking these deep questions. What advice do you have to young people who are starting to garner this interest in philosophy?
Ooh, what advice would I have? I have lots of advice. One thing. is to love truth. Okay, put truth center stage. Okay, not defending your pre-existing beliefs, not defending your tribe, not trying to prove a favored view, not trying to prove things that make you feel comfortable. Put truth center stage. Truth is what matters. You should be seeking the truth. So that's number one. Um, Truth over tribes, truth over everything else. Follow truth wherever it leads. Follow the evidence wherever it leads, even if it leads to uncomfortable places, even if it leads you to um, change your deeply held convictions. Follow truth and evidence wherever they lead. So that's the first one, the most important one. The second one, the second piece of advice is to engage in these sorts of philosophical conversations. So firstly, like you learn philosophy by doing philosophy, right? So like find people to do philosophy with, either at your school or among your friend group or online. There are various Discord servers, there are various YouTube channels. Like do philosophy. That consists in reading philosophy. That consists in hearing philosophical lectures or hearing philosophical presentations or discussions or debates or interviews or whatever. And it also consists in participating in discussions with other people, either through uh, the internet or like in person. So that's the second one is actually do philosophy. The third one is do philosophy with love, right? So like love your dialectical partners, the people with whom you're engaged in conversation or debate. Um, Way too often we just sort of see the other person as someone that we should be destroying or like putting down and showing that they're silly and sort of scoring points for my team or whatever. That's not the sort of mindset that you guys should be going into this with. You should be loving your dialectical partner. You should be treating them as you would want to be treated. You should be steel manning their views, which is basically not misrepresenting them, but also like trying to give their views the best hearing that you can and try to like seek out the best arguments for their views and not just attack the weakest versions of their views. You should be essentially just a respectful, loving interlocutor who's not trying to beat up the other person and not trying to like perform or not trying to, showcase your intelligence or anything. That is, um, I think that's intellectually vicious. We should just be striving to cultivate intellectual virtue here, intellectual humility, love of your dialectical partner, love of truth, open-mindedness. Um, I guess another final thing that I'll say here is always try to be consuming philosophy. So like that's what I tried to do from a very young age. If I was walking between classes, I would be listening to philosophy, either a debate or a lecture or, Kane B or something. I like Kane B's channel. I would be listening to Kane B like just in between lectures. At dinner, I would be, listening to philosophy. When I was doing laundry or doing the dishes, I'd be listening to philosophy. When I'm uh, on the bus or something, I'd be like reading philosophy Substack or like reading a philosophy blog article or something like that. Um, just like if you can find ways to permeate your life with philosophy and just always absorb, always just doing philosophy somehow, thinking about these things, you will grow and you will learn so much. So that's another piece of advice is just to like always be absorbing. Constant absorption is what I would say.
The internet and social media are such big parts of our lives that no matter what we try to do, they're kind of going to be inseparable from it. But how do you think social media and the internet have influenced philosophy? Do you think that it's been beneficial or detrimental?
That's a good question. Yeah, has it been? I mean, there's okay. I think there are lots of things beneficial about it. Okay, so I don't know if I can make like an on the whole judgment about whether it's been overall beneficial or detrimental or neutral, but there are various different factors that contribute towards its being beneficial and various different factors that contribute towards its being detrimental. And I think there are lots of those factors that contribute towards its being beneficial. Um, I just think the rise of public philosophy gets people firstly interested in philosophy, especially from a much earlier age. Like I was like I said, I got into philosophy, well, partly through my religious upbringing, but also massively through the popularization of people like Jeff Lauder, Justin Schieber, Kane B. Like these people got me into philosophy. They were a huge factor there. Um, and I know that they got lots of other people into philosophy as well. So they increased the public consciousness concerning philosophy. They showcase what good philosophy looks like to people. And they educate people about philosophical topics. So I think that's just like very, very good. Now, I mean, other good things about this is like it kind of democratizes um, the academy in some sense, right? Like a lot of the academic work prior to the internet was sort of cloistered up in ivory towers, where like you had to have you had to have some sort of like position at a university to read relevant papers and books and whatnot, or even to have access to them. But like that's no longer the case. Like, oh my goodness, we've got like audiobooks now. We've got like free websites where you could like read cutting edge philosophy and people upload their papers onto Phil papers. And like philosophers are now going on to various different podcasts and talking about their work to a broader audience, where otherwise, the only people who would have read their work are like maybe them, their colleagues, and like the reviewers for the relevant journals. But no, now like thousands of people are reading philosophy papers. So like that sort of democratization of philosophical knowledge, I think, is incredibly valuable. It does, of course, come with downsides, right? Like with a proliferation of good philosophy also comes a proliferation of terrible philosophy on the internet. So there's sort of like a diluting factor, maybe. And now, people who don't know a lot about philosophy might struggle to see like which are the high quality resources, which are the low quality resources, which are the ones which are kind of accurately representing the philosophy and like doing philosophy particularly well, and which others are kind of misrepresenting the philosophy and doing philosophy poorly. So like the lower barriers to entry for the internet, for the age of the internet means that you do get a lot more crackpots and you get a lot more crackpots and you get a lot more bad philosophy proliferating as well. So there are goods and bads about the age of the internet and its connection with philosophy, but overall, I think I'm more optimistic. How could I not be as uh, a contributor to this sphere? So,
Yeah. Like I said before, you mentioned that you've been studying philosophy from a really young age, and you came into it kind of from a Christian background. But barring you like looking at the problem of evil and being like, this can't be with evolution, what do you think is the biggest change that has happened to your own philosophical worldview?
I mean, I had some wild views in high school. Like, I had some really wild views. Well, maybe I shouldn't say that they're really wild, but I mean, so I'll go through a few. I mean, like, one of them is like the shift from, well, as you mentioned, you said setting it aside, but I had one big shift was from a very devout Christian life to a kind of metaphysical naturalism where, the natural world is all that there is. There are no uh, gods or angels or anything supernatural. Um, so that was a big shift that came around ninth-ish grade. But another big shift was from that to agnosticism. So like around 11th-ish, 12th grade, I think it was probably about 12th grade, I came across the work of Josh Rasmussen, Alexander Pruss, and a few others. And I was like, oh my goodness, they sort of awakened me from my dogmatic metaphysical naturalist slumbers. And I was like, wow, there's a lot more to theism than I initially thought. They just had various different cosmological arguments that I found quite interesting, like new cosmological arguments that like never before published, which some of which featured in their book Necessary Existence, published in 2018. Um, and I was just coming across like really interesting arguments that I hadn't previously come across. And I was like, wow, okay, I probably shouldn't be a naturalist. There's a lot more to theism than I initially thought, and there's actually some decent evidence for theism. So that was a big shift going kind of back from naturalism to agnosticism. In high school, I had, like I said, I had some wacky views. Like at one point during high school, I was an epiphenomenalist. So epiphenomenalism is the view that um, phenomenal properties, so properties of consciousness like being in pain and experiencing pleasure, just like the felt sensations of things, are not physical properties. They're not they're not the same thing as neurons firing or They're not identical to anything in the brain. They're actually non-physical features of reality. But I also, but epiphenomenalism also says that in addition to these things being non-physical features of reality, they are caused by brain states, but they don't have any causal effects on the physical world. So, as it were, your consciousness and your phenomenal properties, as I was saying, kind of just like float free. They are, as it were, like steam that's produced by the brain, but they don't have any further physical effects. Um, and that's really weird. It means that like your pain doesn't cause like the feeling of pain doesn't cause you to say ouch or to engage in any avoidance behavior. Your desire for like your felt desire for water when you're thirsty doesn't make you drink the water. Instead, it's like purely a function of the various um, neural firings in your brain, which causes your muscles to tense up in various ways. Um, that's a very weird view, and I held that for a decently long period in high school. I also in high school, okay, so the shift was getting rid of that view. I'm no longer an epiphenomenalist. Um, I don't quite know what exactly to make of philosophy of mind, but I guess I would lean towards some form of like broadly non-physical. So I'm not a physicalist, but I do think that mental states, mental properties, have causal effects. Um, okay, so that was a big shift. Another big shift. I was actually a free will skeptic in high school. I thought that we couldn't know. So I never actually positively claimed that we don't have free will. Or no, that's actually false. I did think we didn't have free will and we could know that. Um, yeah, I was a free will denier, in fact, in high school for a few years, in fact. But eventually I came to see the light and I saw that no, we do have free will and we are morally responsible. And it is appropriate to like blame Hitler for what he did. So, and for what other people do as well. So yeah, that was another shift. And then, I mean, there have been various other shifts as well, but like those are some of the main ones, like concerning God's existence, concerning free will, concerning like whether or not my mind has any effects on the world. Um, yeah.
And my last question to you is, what do you hope that people get from your channel?
I hope they gain an appreciation for the majesty of reason, right? So, like my channel, the name is Majesty of Reason because I saw this Baruch Spinoza quote and I was like, this is so beautiful. The quote is, "What altar of refuge can a man find for himself when he commits treason against the majesty of reason?" Right? So it's like I want people to appreciate reason. And what does that consist in? It consists in I want people to become better thinkers. I want to help them think critically and cogently and carefully and lovingly about the fundamental nature of reality, about, for instance, whether God exists, about morality, about um, ethics, politics, decision theory, various different philosophical domains. Um, so I want to help people in that regard, but I also want to cultivate within them a love of truth, um, a kind of distaste for tribalism. I want to cultivate in my audience the various intellectual virtues that I was mentioning earlier. So, like intellectual humility, um, open-mindedness, curiosity, love of truth, love of neighbor, as I was saying. Um, and that's really what I want to get out of my channel. I mean, like, of course, it'd be nice if I could convince people of, my views as well, because I think that my views are true and I want other people to have true beliefs. But like, ultimately, that's just like that's not center stage. That's not my primary goal. Like I really don't care if people come away from my channel not agreeing with me. Um, so long as they come away improved and with a greater appreciation for the majesty of reason in precisely the senses that I've just articulated.
Well, that's great. Thank you so much, Joe. I'm seriously so grateful for you to take the time, and I promise not to take too much of it. So, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you for this. That was great.